Hello, beautiful community. Welcome back to the show. This is Overcoming Overwhelm, a nervous system approach to health, wellness, and success. And so, among all of the beautiful guests that we've had here, all of them are saying the same thing, how important the nervous system is as a foundational piece to everything that you want to change and create for yourself. And today's guest is amazing. I can't wait to dive in and get her perspective on how the nervous system plays into this. And this is Dr. Nancy Crowell. And she's really offering boutique functional health. She helps high performers radically transform their health. She believes being healthy is your birthright and has supported hundreds in healing their high functioning anxiety, fatigue, hormonal and digestive imbalances, and preventing autoimmune conditions. Her mission is to inspire you to create a life of freedom from your symptoms and diagnoses so that you can live your purpose and share your gifts with the world. Amen. I love that as a mission. Is so important. So I'm excited to dive in, and I'd love to hear from you. And I've asked a number of guests, for me, learning about the nervous system and its importance as a foundational piece to overcoming emotional eating, that wasn't something that I knew on day one. And for a lot of my guests, the same thing. We were trying to treat people and help them and support them, but maybe not understanding the importance of starting with the nervous system as a first step. So I'm curious in your own work if how you came about incorporating the nervous system work into your practice as a functional medicine practitioner.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of around, as many, I think, healers, I have a wounded healer journey, meaning it's my own personal journey, but my foundational health education is as a doctor of Oriental medicine. And so in Chinese medicine or East Asian medicine, the foundational piece, it's based on Taoism. And so in Taoism, it's a very spiritual approach to medicine. And at the base of that, the very root of that, the fundamentals, there's a belief that emotions are the root cause of disease. So I had that as a concept very early on. And so when I was studying the medicine, I was already very drawn to two particular teachers of mine at my school. One was a 5 elements practitioner, which is based off of just pure emotion, like emotional based healing. And then another was a functional medicine practitioner who was also an acupuncturist. So I had already kind of seen that. And then I went through my own health journey and I became a functional medicine practitioner. And I ended up doing a leadership development program I think it was probably about 5 years ago. And the leadership development program was very intense and it brought up a lot of stuff for me. And it wasn't until I went back and actually coached and mentored in that leadership development program that I started to see that actually what was being brought up in me was trauma. And so I started to, like many people maybe watching this, I never defined or thought that I was someone who had experienced trauma, even though now when I think about it, I'm like, how did I not? Because I have a lot of things that were actually quite traumatic that did happen, but I just didn't think that. Like, I was like most people, like, that's the person that had this really intense, they're a war survivor or a veteran or something like that. That wasn't me.
Right,
And so
right.
I think once I started to see that and really see how my own traumas and my own nervous system were what was creating those glass ceilings for myself. And I was already doing vagal nerve toning in my programs with clients and that sort of thing. So I was already doing it, but I think it was more from an educational standpoint. Like, I knew scientifically that all of these things were supportive. So I knew, but I didn't know, I guess, in a deeper sense.
Oh my gosh, yes.
And so it was like in the last 5 years that I started to actually embody the work of the nervous system on a deeper level and really understand and see in my clients, in myself, in my relationships, how much that was basically the interference between what we all want, which is connection, love, success, all of those things that we're really wanting to create.
Wow. I love that. It's so awesome to hear that. You know, I was on a meeting this morning for the program that I run, helping people overcome emotional eating. And it was like, this is exactly some of what we had to be talking about, because you can learn the tools and how our brains work and how our systems are wired. And, you know, you can learn all about that from more of that knowledge level, but it's not until you bring that into experiences and our own life experiences, right? And watch how they play out in the experience of other people before you really have a handle on, you know, really know it. Right. It's the two levels of knowledge. So I love that you said that. And I also love that you highlighted for people, you know, it is true that most of the people that I work with do not identify as having had trauma. And, you know, and I even started calling it overwhelm instead of trauma, because there was just this, oh, no, that's not me. She's not talking to me. I can't hear you because I haven't had trauma. Right. And so I wonder if you have any thoughts of why it is that we're so reluctant to acknowledge for ourselves that there were things in our lives that were just more than we could handle in the moment. And maybe before you address that, maybe if you would share with us your definition of trauma so that we can really start to open this up, unpack what it means to have experienced trauma.
I think trauma is well, you know, we always discern big T trauma and little t trauma, but at the end of that, the base of that really is the inability to digest and assimilate an experience. And bring ourselves back into a sense of safety. So as children, that is really not having a care provider to help us navigate and, you know, understand what's happened to us and allow us to process that information. And that's why we can have things that we might not have thought should have been traumatic actually be traumatic, because we didn't actually have someone there to facilitate that process for us. And that doesn't allow us to digest and assimilate the experience appropriately.
Yeah.
And then as adults, many of us were never taught how to do that as well. And so we still don't know how to digest it and kind of assimilate that. And also a lot of people are lacking boundaries. I mean, there's different layers there as to why there might be things just like going to work is traumatic for some individuals, right? Because it is a repetitive situation that they're not able to actually bring themselves back into a sense of safety around. So I think trauma can be more widely defined. I don't think it's just being a victim of, you know, domestic violence or those sorts of things that we kind of define as that. And I think a lot of us, and I know for myself, I think we avoid the word trauma because it brings up a sense of brokenness. And I think a lot of us are looking to find wholeness. I think, I forget what the statistic is, but most individuals, most of the decisions that we make in life are based off of how other people view us. They've done a lot of studies. So a lot of times people make investments in purses or cars or houses, not based off of how they feel, but how they're going to be perceived by others, right? And so if we then claim this title or this descriptive word as a trauma survivor, how is that then having others view us? And if we're not deeply rooted in a sense of self and we don't really understand what that means, then that can just trigger more wounding, right? So I think it also is around the level of self-awareness. And I would agree that I don't go around saying like, oh, I'm a trauma survivor or something like that. Because I do believe that words matter. And I've experienced a lot of people, and I think maybe in the beginning of a process, you could identify as that. But I think if you hold on to that too long, it becomes too much of your identity,
Sure.
and you're not able to kind of allow that energy to flow through you. So I think it's better to, maybe describe it as I have experienced traumatic events, or I've experienced things that were traumatic, rather than really self-identifying as that person, because I can think of a couple people off the top of my head that really self-identify as that. And I don't know that they're able as easily to move beyond that. And I
Mhm,
think the
mhm.
purpose of all of this is to realize that we are limitless. And the whole purpose of it is to actually heal it.
Yeah. How beautiful. I love that. I love this. And I think it really is important. And one of the things that I'm sure, as caregivers, we help people process is, where is that line where I can both acknowledge, the things that were too much for me to handle at earlier times, tend to those places, and also rise above them and not feel kind of the victimhood. And yeah, and when we hear that word, it's like, oh, I've experienced trauma. This is going to be a great big rough journey, right? It has to be. My healing has to be this big thing because I've experienced trauma. And so that's really not what I hear you saying, and certainly not what I would bring to people, is that the acknowledgement and just the understanding, oh, these events had this impact on me, right? And now I get to put my attention on how I can support myself best, and work through that. So I
I
love
also, yeah,
that.
I'd like to add that I don't know that there's a human being on this planet that has not experienced trauma.
Yeah.
So, I believe that the way that our society is actually being run, or the way that it moves,
Yeah,
is in and itself traumatic.
absolutely. Yeah.
And so I think that's another thing to keep in mind. If someone's been working on something and they can't figure out, they're doing all the things, and
Yeah.
yet still they're feeling, as you defined, overwhelm, or the anxiety, or just absolute fatigue. Like, obviously there's things that I can talk about that are physiological, and in all the other speakers can talk about nervous system regulation and all of that. But our society is constantly re-traumatizing us because of the demands that it's put on us. We are not meant to live in the way that we are currently living. And so I think it's important to keep that into context, that on some level we are sweeping the ocean out, right? So
Right.
we're
Yeah.
like,
I
it's
like
just,
that analogy.
like it's going to keep coming. And I think I tell my clients a lot, like, we're moving into this technological era. Things are going to continue to become more and more rapid. Our nervous systems are not designed for the level of speed that we are constantly being bombarded with.
Yeah.
And so if we are not doing the work on our nervous system, if we are not resilient in our health and in our bodies, then we will crumble. We are seeing a rise of mental health issues. We're seeing a
Mhm.
rise of, suicide, unfortunately, all of these sorts of things. And I feel strongly at the base is we have a very imbalanced society. And the only way that we can really keep afloat is if we are investing in ourselves in that way.
Yeah, we're going to adapt, right? When we have the skills and we have the guides to help us kind of understand what that looks like, we can adapt just like we always have throughout, throughout all of time. But we do have to be aware of that and understand how it's affecting us. And, it's easy to not notice because we're just normalized to it, right? That's just life. Everybody's doing it. Why should it be so hard for me? But, your comments really remind me of Gabor Mate's latest book, the myth of normal, which is
Mhm.
basically the same premise. Like, no, we're all normal. Our systems are acting, exactly. Anxiety and all these things is normal for the situation in which we find ourselves in. So if anyone's interested in, diving into that, it's quite a hefty book. I think it's about an Audible. I think it's about 17 hours, something like that.
Wow.
Anyway,
Yeah.
incredible work, really helping us understand your point, which is, we weren't meant to live like that unless we're adapting and understanding the impact on our nervous system so that we can support it in ways that allow us to stay regulated and resourced and resilient. Yeah.
Right.
Beautiful. Well, because you have a little bit of a unique background here among the speakers, having more of the, I guess, what I would call the biology piece, the physiology piece of what happens to us when we are living with past trauma. And so I would love to dive into that a little bit with you. And if you could just kind of help us understand what happens to the body, right? We tend to think about trauma and the effects that it has on our mind, on our psyche. And those are very important. We have to look at those. But there's also a biological piece of what happens to our cells and our mitochondria and all the pieces of us when we've lived in a state of trauma, stress response, overwhelm. So I would love to understand how your work relates to that and what you can kind of share with us along those lines.
Yeah. So one thing I do also want to kind of expand as a definition of trauma is that we often think of it as a psycho-emotional experience, but there's a lot of environmental factors that are traumatic for the body as well. So when we're looking at why our nervous system can be dysregulated, it's not just to do with emails or past experiences, but there's quite a few people that are having high levels of chemical exposures. They're living in homes with mold toxicity. They're eating foods that disrupt their gut microbiome. They have an imbalance of blood sugar. So all of that actually wreaks havoc on the nervous system as well.
Yeah.
It impacts the brain and the limbic system. So you kind of have to have it as two approaches. So you need to be maintaining your nervous system from a stress response, a perceived stress, right? How information is coming in, and managing that and managing how you feel and what you need. But on the other side of that, even if you're doing all of that work, and I've had many clients that are very high level entrepreneurs that already know a lot to do with the nervous system, but they're still highly dysregulated. And when we run functional labs, it's because they have high levels of mold toxicity, their hormones are imbalanced, and their blood sugar is dysregulated. So no matter how much breathing or somatic experiencing or whatever it is that they're doing to regulate their nervous system, it doesn't matter because their biochemistry is off.
Right.
And specifically with biotoxins such as mold, that is highly dysregulating for the nervous system.
Sure.
And so I guess if we're going to see like a side by side of those, I think probably there's been other speakers that have probably talked about polyvagal theory.
Yes.
And so we have the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the healing state. And in that state, it's actually anti-inflammatory. So all of your body is functioning optimally at that state. Your digestion is functioning optimally. And that's, as I'm sure not the first person to say, is the home that we should be residing in, right?
Exactly. That's the glorious place we're striving for, at least much of the time.
Yeah. And there's actually a function to all of the states. And so the sympathetic state is inflammatory in nature. And the heart rate speeds up, and actually our focus gets more intense, and there's actually a time and place for that as well, and same with dorsal vagal. So that's kind of where the nervous system is at. If we look at a cell, there's something called cell danger response. And so the cells actually go through kind of a similar response. So if we have a cell and our cells are responsible for making energy, okay, the thing within a cell that makes energy is something called ATP. So just like we cannot be in parasympathetic or sympathetic at the same time. Well, I guess there's blended states, but more like just for clarity's sake, we're going to say we can't be in parasympathetic and sympathetic at the same time. The cell cannot be producing energy and fighting at the same time. So The ATP is when it's inside the cell, is creating energy for the body.
Mhm.
There's a virus or a pathogen or mold or bacteria, the ATP leaves the cell to then fight whatever that is.
Yeah.
So that is called cell danger response. So we can think of this in the like an analogy kind of, or a side by side. The parasympathetic is when the ATP is inside the cell producing energy. The sympathetic in the cell is when this ATP has left and is in fighting, right? That's an inflammatory state.
Yeah.
One is a healing state, one is an inflammatory state. They can't happen simultaneously. So if the nervous system state is in those, we're seeing that in the cells, and vice versa. If the cell is in that spot, we're going to feel that in our nervous system. And so when I'm working with clients, I tell them there's 5 things that are very, very important in order to create healing. One is to make sure that we have low toxic load. And that looks like environmental toxins, but it also looks like the gut microbiome. So our gut health is good. We don't have high levels of mold, Lyme, those sorts of things. The second is that our hormones are optimized. And when I talk about hormones, a lot of times people think of estrogen, progesterone in women.
Yeah.
Those are important, but those are not actually the main ones. I mean, those are kind of far down the line. The ones that we really want to make sure are optimal are our cortisol, like our adrenal hormones, and our blood sugar, because they actually have the biggest impact. And then after that, potentially thyroid. But again, if our toxic load is good, our blood sugar is good, and our stress chemicals are good, typically those other hormones fall in place on their own.
And can't be okay. If these are off, the other ones can't be okay.
Right. Yeah. And then the other thing that is super important is the psycho-emotional aspect. So really understanding the emotion, like I call it the emotional root cause of your dis-ease. And so that has to do with stress tolerance, that has to do with your capacity, that has to do with understanding just how you embody emotions, whether or not you repress them or express them. And then the 4th thing that needs to be addressed is making sure that you actually have a diet that is supportive of you. So I don't believe in one size fits all diets. I believe, and by diet, you guys, I'm not talking about restrictive eating necessarily. I'm talking about a way of eating, a way of nourishing.
Nourishing your body, giving it what it needs.
Yeah. So for some people, that maybe they have super, what do they call it? Like high levels of mitochondrial dysfunction, super low energy. A ketogenic diet might be really supportive for them, but that might not be the best thing for somebody else that has some like anxiety, right? And that's their main issue. So really understanding what age you're at, that really matters, what your goals are, what your health history is, what your lab values say, where you live in the world. Okay, that's another thing that people aren't really taking into consideration, but our environment really impacts our health and what we need to be eating. And then the last thing that I feel like is really important is community and support, because it is a big missing piece in our society. And I think a lot of us, especially people that are high achievers, that have experienced past traumas, there tends to be a very much a lone wolf mentality, especially now that we live in the age of ChatGPT and Google, and we can gain access. Anything that I say here, you could Google, right? We are not in a lack of information by any means, but we are in a lack of connection. We are in a lack of integration. We are in a lack of, there's a lot of healing that happens whenever we are in co-regulation with other humans. And so that's a very important piece to this, as well as making sure that you have other humans that are doing the same work as you and that are able to mirror you in the way that you need to get that deeper healing.
Yes, so beautiful to speak your language, right? This is so powerful, and I love how you broke it down for us in a way that we could really understand, because if we're not tending to the body piece, the nervous system is going to remain active and in that state. And it's such an important piece. And, that's actually kind of how I came into more of the biology of trauma and how to make sure, people's systems are being supported. Because when you're in shutdown, especially cell danger response, you're just protected. You're not open, right? You're closed. You're under the bed. You're like, I'm not leaving under the bed. It's not safe out there. We're not open to changing our thoughts. We're not open to, seeing the world in a little bit of a different way. And it's our bodies that are at least partially sending that message that it's not safe out there. So we've got to be looking at these things, and all of these, I see them as such important pieces in really overcoming, what the past in whatever way, and stepping into your power, and being able to change. And that's what this series is all about. It's about especially people who have been in this space trying to make change for so long, and they assume, unfortunately, there's something wrong with me, right? Other people, it must work for other people, but not me. And this is such a missing piece. I've seen people literally tend to their body, to the things that you're describing, get these things back in at the levels and the balance that they need to be, and their work was done because they had done so much. It's just they couldn't step into it yet because the body wasn't there.
Right.
And so I love that you're out there doing this work in the world, helping people take care of their bodies in a way that allows them to share their gifts with the world, like you said. And that's exactly what they'll be able to do. So you guys, this is such a big missing piece. And I think that, medicine, unfortunately, for the most part, isn't marrying these two things that you're talking about today. And so to find someone who has the ability to do that is a real gift. So I'm really happy that you were here with us and spent time with us, and let people know that this is a very important piece, and that there are people out there who know how to help them do that. So you guys, Dr. Cromwell has a very special gift for us. So I'd love for you to share that with us, and so people can download that and get started with it.
Yeah. So what I'm gifting is a 5-day, it's essentially a mini program. So it's called the Energy Boost Detox. You get 5 trainings, a workbook that goes along with it, with a meal plan. So you're able to actually learn, integrate, utilize, and see a result at the end of it. So what it will actually focus on is making sure that your biochemistry is where it should be. And if you watch you could just do the dietary part and see a result, but if you actually watch the 5 trainings as well, there's a lot of mindset and nervous system work in that as well. So it's a very high value gift.
Yeah.
And I know that everyone's time is their most precious asset, but if you actually utilize it, you'll see big results. And then you'll be able to see how your physical health might be part of what's actually holding you back.
Absolutely. Yeah. And taking a step like this, low hanging fruit, right? These are simple changes that you can make that will really, open up more possibility for you. And that's, this is awesome. And I'm so excited for people to get this and get started. So thank you so much. It's been really a pleasure to have you here and to have this important conversation. And I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you guys for watching. I look forward to hearing your comments on what this brings up for you, what you're thinking, and also bringing you the next interview.